A CEO was walking past Buckingham Palace when he heard a royal guard speaking fluent Mandarin, then Spanish, then French. By the time the guard revealed his ninth language, the CEO made an offer worth £1 million right there on the spot. But what the guard said next, no one saw that coming. Want to know exactly how this incredible encounter unfolded? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get into it. You know that particular kind of London morning, where the air carries just enough chill to make your breath visible, but the sun's already promising warmth by noon? That's exactly what it was like outside Buckingham Palace at 9:30 on a Tuesday in March. The kind of day when the Union Jack snaps crisply against its pole, and the gravel crunches satisfyingly under every footstep. The usual crowd had already gathered behind the barriers, families with pushchairs, tourists clutching guidebooks, teenagers posing for Instagram shots. They were all there for the same reason everyone comes to the palace, to catch a glimpse of something extraordinary in the middle of their ordinary day. Most of them barely noticed Sergeant Idris Nori. He stood at his ceremonial post near the main gates, rifle held at precisely the regulation angle. His crimson tunic pressed so sharp you could probably cut yourself on the creases. His bearskin cap added nearly a foot to his already imposing height, and his boots, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the grey morning sky, were planted exactly shoulder-width apart. To the tourists pointing their phones and whispering, behind cupped hands, he was just another piece of the scenery. Something to photograph between the palace architecture and the changing of the guard. A human statue in an elaborate costume. Impressive, but essentially decorative. But here's what those tourists didn't know about the man standing motionless in front of them. Sergeant Idris Nori had grown up in a cramped terrace house in Handsworth, Birmingham, where 3 languages floated through the air like cooking spices. His Moroccan father spoke Arabic during evening prayers. His British Algerian mother taught primary school French during the day and switched to her grandmother's Berber dialect when she was angry, and young Idris absorbed every syllable like a sponge left in the rain. He taught himself Mandarin from library books and YouTube videos, picked up Spanish from the neighbours next door who played music too loud and argued too often. Portuguese came from a Brazilian barber who cut his hair for free in exchange for help with immigration paperwork. Italian arrived through cooking shows his mother watched religiously. Farsi developed during late-night conversations with a taxi driver who became a friend. By the time he'd enlisted in the Coldstream Guards at 19, he could navigate conversations in 9 languages with the kind of fluency that comes not from textbooks but from necessity, curiosity, and a mind that simply refused to stay quiet even when his mouth had to. But none of that mattered to the middle-aged woman currently explaining to her husband why the guards weren't allowed to move or talk. "They're trained to be like robots," she was saying, loud enough for half the crowd to hear. "Probably don't even speak proper English. Most of them just hired to stand there and look impressive." Idris heard every word. He always did, but his expression never changed, not even a flicker. Across the courtyard, a very different kind of procession was making its way toward the palace's VIP entrance. No tour groups or guidebooks here, just a dozen executives in tailored suits moving with the casual confidence of people accustomed to having doors open for them. At the center of the group walked Alistair Greaves, CEO of Halion Global Logistics, early 50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a navy overcoat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He carried himself with the easy authority of someone who'd built a company from 3 employees in a Sheffield warehouse to 15,000 staff across 47 countries. A bit theatrical, all this, he murmured to his VP of International Operations, gesturing vaguely at the ceremonial display around them. Still, the clients love the royal treatment, makes them feel important. They were here for a morning reception, part of an ongoing diplomatic initiative to strengthen trade relationships between Britain and emerging markets. High-level networking, disguised as cultural appreciation, with just enough pomp and circumstance to justify the helicopter journey down from Manchester. Greaves glanced at his Rolex. They were running slightly ahead of schedule. In his world, that meant everything was going according to plan. He liked precision, predictability, metrics that made sense, and people who delivered what they promised. What he didn't expect was chaos. It started with a voice cutting through the morning air, loud, distressed, and speaking rapid-fire Mandarin, with a Beijing accent so crisp it could have come straight from the evening news. The man was middle-aged, wearing an expensive dark suit, and clearly part of some official delegation, but he was also visibly panicking, separated from his group, and gesturing frantically at palace security guards, who were staring at him with the blank expressions of people trying to solve a puzzle in a language they didn't speak. Palace security. Team activated immediately, earpieces crackling, heads turning. That particular kind of controlled urgency that happens when protocol meets unexpected complications. But they were stuck. None of them spoke Mandarin. Their translator was apparently missing in action. Their clearly important foreign dignitary was growing more agitated by the second. Greaves stopped walking. He'd spent enough time in international boardrooms to recognize a diplomatic incident brewing. This was exactly the kind of miscommunication that could derail carefully planned relationships and turn positive headlines into embarrassing footnotes. And then something extraordinary happened. Without turning his head, without shifting his stance, without even blinking, Sergeant Idris Nori spoke. In perfect Mandarin. Please don't worry, sir. You're in the right place. The main reception is in that entrance hall. His voice was calm, clear, and carried the unmistakable cadence of someone who'd grown up speaking the language rather than learned it from a textbook. Perfect Beijing standard Mandarin, delivered with the kind of natural fluency that most people spend decades trying to achieve. The entire courtyard seemed to inhale at once. The distressed man's face transformed immediately, relief flooding, his features like sunrise after a long night. You speak Chinese? Wonderful. Can you help me find the right entrance? Idris gave the smallest possible nod, barely perceptible unless you were watching for it. Of course. Please follow my colleagues. They'll escort you to the VIP reception. The man practically sagged with gratitude, switching to accented English for the benefit of the palace security team. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was completely lost, but Idris had already returned to his perfect stillness. Rifle, at regulation angle, eyes fixed on that distant point guards are trained to focus on, as motionless as if the entire exchange had never happened, except everyone had heard it. Everyone had witnessed a man they dismissed as a ceremonial prop reveal himself as something else entirely in the space of 2 sentences. Greaves stood frozen in place, his executive autopilot completely shut down. He was staring at the guard, actually looking at him for the first time instead of past him. The morning's carefully planned schedule suddenly seemed a lot less important than understanding what had just happened. Near the tourist barriers, the conversations had shifted from casual observations to confused whispers. Did that guard just speak Chinese? That was definitely Chinese, right? I thought they weren't allowed to talk. A teenage boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mum, how did he know what that man was saying? His mother didn't answer. She was still staring at Idris with the expression of someone trying to reconcile what she'd just witnessed with everything she thought she knew about the men in red tunics. But Greaves wasn't interested in the crowd's reaction. He was thinking about something much more practical. In 12 months of international expansion, his company had encountered exactly this kind of breakdown at least 30 times. Missed connections because of language barriers. Failed negotiations because nuances got lost in translation. Millions of pounds worth of opportunities that slipped away because the person with the right words wasn't in the room when they were needed. And here was someone who'd just solved that problem in 30 seconds without moving a muscle. He stepped away from his delegation, ignoring his assistant's confused expression, and walked directly toward the guard post. The palace security officer noticed immediately. Sir, I'll need to ask you to maintain distance from the ceremonial positions. Greaves held up a hand. Of course. I just want to ask something. He stood as close to the boundary as protocol allowed and looked directly at Idris. That was impressive. Where did you learn to speak Mandarin like that? Idris remained perfectly still, eyes fixed forward. Greaves tried a different approach. Parlez-vous français aussi? You speak French as well? And to the amazement of everyone within earshot, Idris responded immediately, not hesitantly or formally, but with the natural ease of casual conversation. Oui, monsieur. Couramment. Yes, sir. Fluently. The French rolled off his tongue with a Parisian accent so authentic it could have come from the Sorbonne. Clean, crisp, effortless. Greaves took a step back, his expression shifting from curiosity to something approaching awe. Someone in the crowd, a young man with a thick London accent, called out with a laugh, "What's next then? Italian? Spanish?" As if responding to a challenge, Idris spoke again, this time switching to perfect Spanish with a Castilian lilt. "If you need assistance, the security staff can direct you to the protocol office." Laughter died immediately. Then, without being asked, he added in Italian so flawless it could have come from the Vatican. The main entrance is always open for authorized visitors. By now, the crowd had gone completely silent. Phones were appearing in hands, but nobody was taking photos anymore. They were just listening, trying to process what they were witnessing. Greaves felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine surprise. As CEO of a global logistics company, he'd hired dozens of translators, interpreters, and cultural consultants. He'd paid premium rates for people with degrees from prestigious universities and certificates from renowned language institutes. But he'd never heard anyone switch between languages with this kind of natural fluency. Not linguistic, showmanship, or academic precision, the real thing. The kind of multilingual competence that comes from living inside multiple cultures, rather than studying them from the outside. He turned to the nearest palace security officer. "What's his name?" "That's Sergeant Idris Nori, sir. Coldstream. Guards. Nori." Greaves repeated the name slowly, filing it away. "How long has he been stationed here?" 4 years on ceremonial duty, sir." 4 years. Greaves thought about that. 4 years of standing guard while tourists mocked and dismissed him. 4 years of silence while carrying capabilities that most international corporations would pay consultancy fees just to access for a few hours. He looked back at Idris, who remained motionless despite being the center of attention from dozens of onlookers. There was something about that discipline, that ability to remain perfectly composed while every eye in the courtyard was focused on him, that spoke to qualities beyond linguistic talent. "I'd like to speak with him," Greaves said quietly. "When he's off duty," the security officer nodded. "I can arrange that, sir." As Greaves rejoined his delegation for the morning's official proceedings, he found himself paying very little attention to the carefully prepared presentations and networking conversations. Instead, he kept thinking about a man who just demonstrated more practical international competence in 5 minutes than most of his executive team, managed in 5 months. By the time the reception concluded, word had already begun to spread, not through official channels. Palace security were trained to be discreet, but through the quietly efficient gossip network that exists in every large institution. "Did you hear about the guard who spoke Chinese to that visiting dignitary?" Not just Chinese, French and Spanish too. How does someone like that end up standing ceremonial duty? More importantly, how long has he been there without anyone noticing? At Wellington Barracks that evening, Idris was changing out of his ceremonial uniform when Lance Corporal Williams approached his locker. "Heard you caused quite a stir today," Williams said, not unkindly. Idris continued hanging up his tunic, with characteristic precision. "Did I? CEO of some big company wants to meet with you. Personally." Idris paused, his hands still for just a moment, before resuming his methodical post-duty routine. "About what?" Williams shrugged. "Above my pay grade, but word is, it's something big." That night, Idris sat in the small flat he rented in Battersea, staring out at the London skyline. He could see some of the towers that housed international corporations, their windows glowing with the late-night ambition of people building empires across time zones. He'd always been content with his role in the guards. Structure appealed to him. The discipline, the sense of purpose that came from being part of something larger than individual ambition. He'd never felt invisible in his uniform. Quite the opposite. He'd felt protected by it, insulated from a world that often demanded more self-promotion than he was comfortable giving. But today had been different. For the first time in 4 years, someone had looked past the ceremonial facade and seen the person underneath. Not just seen him, but recognized something valuable enough to pursue. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Sergeant Nori, this is Alistair Greaves from Hallion Global. I'd very much like to speak with you at your convenience tomorrow evening, if possible. This isn't about military service. It's about opportunity. Idris read the message twice, then set the phone aside without responding. Some decisions, he'd learned, were too important to make quickly. Dorchester's private dining room was understated in the way that only truly expensive places manage. Crystal glasses that caught the light just so. Silverware heavy enough to feel substantial. And an atmosphere of muted elegance that suggested serious conversations happened here regularly. Idris arrived precisely on time, wearing his dress uniform rather than civilian clothes. It was a deliberate choice. If this conversation was about who he was and what he could offer, then he wanted there to be no confusion about where those capabilities had been forged. Greaves was already waiting, dressed in a charcoal suit that managed to look both formal and relaxed. He stood as Idris entered, extending his hand with the kind of firm handshake that spoke of decades in international business. Sergeant Nori, thank you for coming. Sir, Idris's acknowledgement was crisp, professional, but not deferential. They settled into leather chairs, positioned to look out over Hyde Park, where the evening light was just beginning to fade. Greaves had ordered coffee and water, but neither man touched their drinks immediately. I'll be direct, Greaves began. Yesterday morning I watched you solve a diplomatic problem in 30 seconds that my company's entire communications department couldn't have handled in 30 minutes. I need to understand how someone with your capabilities ended up in ceremonial duty. Idris considered the question for a moment before answering. Where would you expect someone like me to end up? The response caught Greaves off guard. It wasn't deflection or false modesty. It was a genuine question that forced him to examine his own assumptions. Point taken, Greaves said with a slight smile. Let me rephrase. How does a polyglot of your caliber choose military service over international business? My father was a maintenance supervisor at Birmingham Airport, Idris replied, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. Moroccan immigrant, worked 16-hour days to support a family. My mother taught French at a primary school. British Algerian, first in her family to attend university. They didn't have connections in international business or government. They had work ethic, and the belief that service, whether to students or to country, was its own form of success. He paused, not for dramatic effect, but to ensure accuracy. I learned languages the way some people learn to cook or play music, because they were around me, because they were useful, and because I enjoyed the puzzle of how different cultures organize their thoughts. When I turned 18, university wasn't financially feasible. The military offered structure, purpose, and the chance to serve something larger than personal ambition. Greaves leaned forward slightly. But ceremonial, duty, you're essentially decorative in that role. I'm disciplined in that role, Idris corrected, his tone remaining conversational but firm. There's a difference between being ornamental and being committed to precision. Tourists who mock us don't understand that standing perfectly still for 2 hours requires the same mental strength as any other form of excellence. Greaves found himself nodding despite himself. I can appreciate that, but surely you must sometimes think about broader applications for your abilities. For the first time, Idris allowed himself a slight smile. Every day, but thinking and acting are different things. The guards gave me something I couldn't find elsewhere. the knowledge that my value wasn't dependent on self-promotion or political navigation. I was useful because I did my job well, not because I convinced someone I deserved advancement. And what if I told you that you could have both? The certainty of your value and the platform to use all of your capabilities. Idris studied Greaves carefully. I'd ask what you're offering and what you expect in return. Greaves smiled, recognizing the opening he'd been waiting for. I'm offering you a role that doesn't exist yet, because I've only just realized how badly we need it. Chief Cultural Strategist for Halion Global. You'd be responsible for ensuring that our international operations actually understand the people and cultures they're working with. He leaned back, watching Idris's reaction carefully. I have offices in 47 countries, partnerships with suppliers and clients across 6 continents. And despite all our technology and expertise, we constantly struggle with cultural miscommunications that cost us millions of pounds annually. Not because our people are incompetent, but because they're working from English language assumptions in non-English speaking contexts. Idris raised an eyebrow. You want me to be a translator? I want you to be a bridge, Greaves corrected. Translation is about words. What I watched yesterday was about understanding. You didn't just speak Mandarin to that man. You recognized his distress, assessed the situation, and provided exactly the response that would resolve the problem most efficiently. That's not linguistic skill. That's cultural intelligence. The room fell quiet, except for the distant sounds of London traffic. Idris gazed at the park, watching as early evening joggers began to navigate their usual paths. What would that look like in practice? He finally inquired. Participate in international negotiations, review significant contracts before they are executed. Provide guidance on entering new markets. Educate department leaders on cultural norms. Facilitate meetings with international partners. Greaves paused briefly, then continued. And you would receive appropriate compensation, a base salary of $180,000 in addition to equity participation, and performance bonuses tied to the success of projects. Idris turned back to him. That's a lot more than a sergeant earns. It's considerably less than the annual costs incurred due to cultural misunderstandings, Greaves responded. This isn't philanthropy. It's an investment in someone capable of averting costly errors. They shared a comfortable silence for several moments. Eventually, Idris spoke again. I'm grateful for the offer. However, I need clarification. Yesterday, you observed me handle a single situation effectively. How can you be certain I can perform in all that you're outlining? Greaves anticipated this query, because proficiency in a crisis typically signifies proficiency in more tranquil situations. The commitment needed to master 9 languages mirrors the commitment required to navigate intricate international relationships. And because I've invested enough time in this field to recognize when an individual possesses the rare blend of technical expertise and emotional wisdom that cannot be taught. He leaned forward again, his demeanor growing serious. But there's one more aspect. For the last 2 decades, I've cultivated this company by selecting individuals who fit predictable profiles, academic qualifications, relevant experience, professional networks. This method has brought moderate success. Yet yesterday, it struck me that we've overlooked something vital. We've primarily focused on hiring candidates knowledgeable in international business over those who grasp the nuances of global humanity. Idris pondered this for a moment. And you believe I grasp global humanity? I believe you embody it, Greaves replied simply. The question is whether you wish to channel that comprehension into a new form of service. That evening, Idris returned to his apartment and undertook an action he hadn't engaged in for years. He called his mother. Idris, is everything okay? Her voice held that unique blend of affection and concern only a mother can convey. I'm fine, Mum. Just pondering a few things. They conversed for nearly an hour, recalling his upbringing in Birmingham, the languages he had absorbed around their kitchen table, the choices that had directed him to ceremonial duties, and the potential opportunity that could lead him elsewhere. "You know," she remarked near the end of their talk, "your father always believed the best jobs are ones where you can be yourself while helping others do the same." After ending the call, Idris sat at his modest kitchen table and crafted 2 lists on a sheet of paper. On one side, he noted everything he appreciated about his current life. On the other, he listed what he might value about the life Greaves was offering. The lists were shorter than he had anticipated, but clearer. The following morning, he dialed the number Greaves had given him. "I'd like to accept your proposal," he stated when Greaves picked up, "but with one stipulation." "What is that?" "I'll remain in the Guards on a part-time basis, 2 days a week, not for the financial gain. I will serve without extra pay. The discipline that makes me an asset to you derives from the institution that taught me to stand steady when everything around me is in flux." There was a moment of silence on the line. "That's an unconventional request," Greaves finally replied. "So is choosing to hire someone based on overhearing them converse in Mandarin with a stranger." Greaves chuckled. "Fair point. Yes, I believe we can facilitate that arrangement." "We have a deal?" "We certainly do." "When can you commence?" "Next Monday, but I will require a week for military coordination." "Of course, Sergeant Nori." "Yes, thank you. I have a strong feeling this will revolutionize everything." 6 months later, Idris Nori found himself in a conference room located on the 32nd floor of Halion Global's London headquarters, engaged in a simultaneous video conversation with suppliers from Jakarta, São Paulo, and Lagos. He alternated between Indonesian, Portuguese, and English every few minutes, addressing contractual ambiguities that had persisted for weeks. The other executives, all holding notable degrees and boasting extensive international business backgrounds, diligently took notes on his translations and cultural insights, with the focus of eager students learning from a master. Yet, what resonated most with Idris was not just the professional gratification or the monetary rewards. While both were significant, it was the realization that he had discovered a method of serving that allowed him to reconcile the discipline that characterized him with the innate talents he possessed. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he reported to Wellington Barracks, polished his boots to a stellar gleam, and performed ceremonial duty with the same dedication and precision he had always shown. Meanwhile, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he participated in boardroom meetings and conference calls, translating not only languages, but also entire perspectives, aiding individuals from diverse cultures in achieving mutual understanding, to collaboratively build something meaningful. Tourists continued to flock to Buckingham Palace, pointed their cameras at the guards clad in red jackets, and casually commented on the silent sentinels in bearskin caps. Occasionally, however, one in the crowd would murmur to a companion, "The one over there, I heard he speaks 9 languages and works for a major firm, yet he still chooses to stand guard twice a week." In those instances, the dialogue would subtly shift, from casual derision to a sense bordering on admiration, from perceiving the guards as mere decorations to acknowledging them as multifaceted individuals who opted for service over self-aggrandizement. Idris was never privy to these discussions directly. Nonetheless, he sensed their impact in the way people regarded him and his fellow guards, with a gaze that suggested they recognized they were witnessing something beyond mere guise and pageantry. Standing at his post on a brisk Thursday morning in September, observing tourists gather for the changing of the guard, Idris contemplated the journey that led him to this juncture. The languages acquired in a Birmingham terrace, the discipline forged through military service, the possibility that arose from a half-minute of spoken Mandarin on a March morning. He remembered his mother's words. "The best roles are those where you can genuinely be yourself while facilitating others in being true to themselves." For the first time as an adult, Idris comprehended precisely what she had meant. Do you believe that exceptional talent always pursues the highest-paying positions? Or is there merit in staying connected to the institutions that molded you? Have you ever discovered that someone you overlooked had remarkable skill? How did that shift your view? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every response. And these discussions often spark insights we couldn't achieve alone. If this narrative challenged your beliefs about service, success, and the various ways individuals can impact the world, hit that like button. It genuinely supports us more than you might think. Be sure to subscribe and activate that notification bell so you never miss our daily accounts of extraordinary individuals accomplishing remarkable feats in unexpected places. If you know someone who has been underestimated due to their role, background, or choices, share this video with them. Occasionally, we need to be reminded that excellence can take forms that don't always make themselves known. Our next story is ready for you. Another moment demonstrating how talent, discipline, and opportunity can converge in transformative ways for everyone involved. Click it now, and we will see you tomorrow with another tale that challenges what we perceive about potential, service, and the unsung heroes surrounding us.